The other day, I was casually scrolling Reddit when I came across a strange yet intriguing post. A 30-year-old cold case of a missing child in Brazil. The OP goes on to explain that they recall a phenomenon that took place in their home country during the 1990s. It started with a missing boy in 1992. He was alive and well one day before vanishing. 2 months later, it was another kid, and then another, and another. In situations like this, the term cold case hangs a little bit heavier than normal, because it means that justice was never served. But after researching this case, I made some shocking discoveries. In certain homicide cases, the mutilation is so severe that investigators have to employ a number of unique tactics to identify the victim. Such was the case of Evandro Ramos Catano. But upon finding Evandro's body, something wasn't right. And as it would turn out, Evandro's story was merely a door leading to something much darker, including a number of leaked tapes from members of the community who used Evandro's remains for a satanic ritual. Little did people know at the time, but Evandro wasn't the only victim. In fact, he was just one of many. Before we get too deep into the video, this is a Morgan & Morgan legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor known as meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients were not properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, it just takes a couple minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. Click the link in the description to see if you qualify. April 6th, 1992, the last day anyone would ever see Evandro alive again. The boy in the photographs was only in first grade at the time of his disappearance. These pictures of Evandro show a boy with his entire life ahead of him, his eyes bright and looking to the future. But as he walked home from his class that day in April, his trip was interrupted. It's uncertain what exactly happened here, whether Evandro was taken into a vehicle or simply lured off the street by a stranger. But Evandro's parents were distressed when they found out their son never made it home. And suddenly, the community of Guaratuba fell into madness.
Quis receber a equipe do documento especial.
Você tem que procurar, sabe quem tá fazendo tráfico de criança? Sabe quem?
The search for Evandro was conducted by members of the police and many residents in the community, but no one could seem to find any evidence leading to the boy's whereabouts. One day passed, then a second, and a third, and on the fifth day, something changed. The search team had found Evandro. His body was resting in a thicket. He was dead, beaten, but the strangest detail was that he was missing a number of body parts, and later autopsies would show his intestines, liver, and heart were also missing. This physical damage was apparently so bad that the search team initially had trouble identifying whether or not this was in fact the boy they were looking for.
3 vezes. Nós estivemos em Guaratuba.
The news jumped on the case, and suddenly Evandro's face was everywhere. The residents of Guaratuba wanted justice for what had happened. The only problem was that with little to no leads to start researching the case, investigators didn't really know where to begin. People who had seen Evandro's face on the news, however, and heard his story, had some disturbing ideas.
Possible serial killer of children in southern Brazil. First, English is not my native language, so I used an online translator to translate my text from Brazilian Portuguese into English. I apologize in advance for any mistakes. On the coast of Parana, lumberjacks noticed vultures in a bush area where they found the body of a boy. The child was identified as 7-year-old Evandro by his father, Ademir Catano. Ademir was a public servant to the city. Later, the keys to the boy's house and a pair of slippers he was wearing that day were also found near the place where the body was. Evandro was missing since the 6th of the same month, when he traveled 150 meters between the house where he lived and the school where he studied. This was also where his mother worked.
This Reddit post offers some interesting insight. Ademir Catano, Evandro's father, was a politician. I suppose it's possible that one of his opponents had hired someone to kidnap and murder Evandro. The stress and trauma from the situation would force Ademir to step down from his position. But this theory pales in comparison to the rumors being spread about the true nature of Evandro's death. Evandro was missing parts of his body. His eyes, ears, and hands had been removed. His intestines, liver, and heart were missing. Why would someone specifically want these things from their victim? To Guaratuba residents, one theory made sense. Different parts of the world hold different meanings when it comes to witchcraft. For those of us in the West, a lot of times we associate it with things like the Salem witch trials or holidays like Halloween. It's not really something as threatening anymore. It's almost more of a novelty. But in a place like Brazil, especially in the 1990s, it held a whole different meaning. From the late 1890s to the 1920s, witchcraft was strictly prohibited in Brazil. During this time, those practicing such acts were considered to be criminals. The term black magic was used to describe a wide range of acts of witchcraft. And though witchcraft technically became legal after 1922, there would still be a negative stigma around it. In the eyes of many, practicing witchcraft meant allegiance with the devil. So when Evandro Ramos Catano was found with missing parts of his body, people assumed that he had been sacrificed in a satanic ritual. Suddenly, every headline was pushing this narrative, and residents of Guaratuba began to fear that a coven of witches were hiding in their community, sacrificing its children as a means of pleasing the devil. And the strange thing is that evidence began to favor this theory. Just 3 years prior to Evandro's death, Sandra, an 11-year-old girl, seemingly vanished out of thin air. She was attending a party with her sisters and cousin when they decided to leave. Sandra stayed behind, never to be seen alive again. 8 days later, a man's dog would catch the scent of Sandra's body in a vacant lot. She was without eyes, hands, or a scalp. The case would later be closed from lack of evidence. Just like Evandro and Sandra, Leandro was another child who mysteriously disappeared in Guaratuba. But unlike the others, only bone fragments of Leandro would ever be recovered. No body and no culprit. But then things changed as members of the community began confessing to kidnapping Evandro and sacrificing him to the devil. Selena Abaji and her daughter Beatriz told investigators that they, as well as 5 other men, had lured Evandro off the road and brought his body to a ritual site. They then proceeded to kill him. This story shocked the community, as Selena was the wife of a mayor at the time, and Beatriz was her daughter. How could two women in the spotlight commit such a heinous crime? Something wasn't adding up. But in July of 1992, tapes recorded by the police were broadcasted, showing both Selena and Beatriz verbally admitting to everything. Evandro, the body, the ritual, everything was there. Finally, Evandro's family had closure for what had happened to their son. The community of Guaratuba could sleep a little more soundly at night, knowing that the so-called witches of their city were put to justice. And for years, that's how the story ended. Selena and Beatriz, as well as their accomplices, were put behind bars. There was nothing left to say.
Ai, juntando isso, pessoal.
Conte.
Foi tirado os órgãos, você quer que fique...
Como é que não quero que você me fale, como é que era?
In 2015, over a decade since Evandro's case had been put to rest, a man named Ivan Mizanzuk released a number of concerning audio recordings to the public. These tapes were the unedited recordings of confessions made by Evandro's killers. But after listening to them, it's apparent that something is very wrong.
Olha pra mim aqui, Oswaldo.
Vai falar porque eu não aguento mais, eles vão nos matar.
These clips don't show evidence of violent criminals who took a young boy's life. They show individuals who are scared.
Beatriz, você é um ser humano.
In this clip, Beatriz is sitting in a car talking to who I can only assume is law enforcement. She is clearly distressed, almost as if she is being held hostage. The person recording demands to know which of the accused individuals held Evandro down during the ritual. Beatriz responds by crying, stating that she had already confessed and will only speak further in the presence of a lawyer. But the officer recording is relentless and keeps pushing Beatriz until she breaks down. In another video, Osvaldo Masonero, yet another accused in the Evandro case, stands up against a big white wall. The person behind the camera interrogates him, feeding him lines and pressuring him to say things as a means of confession. Osvaldo appears to be exhausted. He can't even look his interrogator in the eye. All semblance of free will has disappeared, leaving only the look of a man who knows his life is over. The longer you watch these tapes, aside from the pressuring, the threats, the feeding lines, you'll notice something darker. The people in these tapes are being tortured.
Se repetiu o sangue da criança.
Ô, de Paula.
Como que ele fez?
Cortou o pescoço da criança.
Ele cortou, estrangulou o pescoço. Você, o que fez?
Eu não fiz nada, fiquei olhando.
Você segurou a criança.
Tá, eu segurei a criança. Ai, juntando isso, pessoal.
Conte.
Foi tirado os órgãos, você quer que fique...
Como é que não quero que você me fale, como é que era? Foi tirado o quê?
Aí nós saímos, porque ele falou que nós não podíamos ver que isso era magia negra. Eu e minha mãe saímos.
Tá, e como é que foi? Quem que segurou a criança enquanto você estava? Os quatro? Todos vocês seguraram?
Nós quatro seguramos.
E daí?
E daí não, três, né, porque de Paula que tava fazendo. Três seguraram, pronto. Tá bom, eu mostro todo o papel.
Você é prisioneira minha, eu vou levar você pra Curitiba. Se você não confessar direitinho que nós está falando pra mim aqui, chegar na hora de você mudar a história, você vai conversar comigo de volta.
Tá. E a minha mãe confirma, assim, eu posso falar com a minha mãe?
Não, depois você fala com a tua mãe. Se você confirmar direitinho...
Tá, mas eu vou dizer, vocês vão dizer que não é.
Não.
Se não for, se não for, eu tento lembrar de novo, mas
tá,
não
tudo bem.
Não fazer nada mais comigo.
Tá. Vai.
Posso levantar a cabeça um pouquinho, mas tô doendo o pescoço?
These weren't the confessions of people who kidnapped and murdered a child. These were the confessions of people who had been tortured and given no other alternative than to agree with whatever law enforcement was giving them. And it worked, because all of these individuals went to jail for what they were made to say. The public hated them, despised them for what they had supposedly done. But at the end of the day, Guaratuba slept better at night, believing that someone evil enough to sacrifice a child was no longer walking their streets. But as it turns out, these fake confessions came with horrifying questions, like if these people didn't kill Evandro, then who did? And were they still out there? Ivan Mizanzuk's audio leaks had a profound impact on the community of Guaratuba. So much so that the leaked audio garnered so much attention that in 2019, a television miniseries was released. Fortunately, because of the evidence put in place by these leaked tapes, Selena and her daughter Beatriz are now free. 2 of the other men accused were also acquitted. But the fact of the matter was that the person or people who did murder Evandro still needed to be put to justice. Despite the orchestrated confessions, some elements of the Evandro investigation remain consistent. The boy had disappeared while walking home from school, and when people found him, he was dead and missing multiple parts of his body. What motivation would someone have to do something so horrible? Well, there are a number of theories from internet researchers that state the conviction of Selena and her daughter Beatriz is not a coincidence. At the time of Evandro's murder, Selena's husband, Aldo Abaji, was the mayor of Guaratuba. There's a popular theory that states one of Aldo's political rivals orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of Evandro. Consequently, they then accused Aldo's wife and daughter in an effort to keep him from getting elected again. After all, in a country grappling with the aftermath of decades of prejudice towards witchcraft, who would vote for someone whose family was involved in the occult? Of all the theories, this one seems to make the most sense to me. But what about the other children who fell victim to a killer at the same time? Surely their deaths weren't a result of political violence. But it is possible that the motivations for these deaths could be even darker.
I'm going to say it was very likely a bunch of unrelated kidnapping/murders and maybe 1 or 2 active serial killers in the mix as well. An environment exists where a group of people are particularly vulnerable, and this attracts all the human wolves in the area. I don't know anything about southern Brazil or Parana, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there was crushing poverty or political turmoil or a breakdown in a social structure in the 80s or 90s. Something that would make murders like these slip through the cracks more easily.
But all of this talk of political violence, serial killers, or police corruption, is any of it as startling as the truth? At the end of the day, we don't know who killed Evandro Ramos Catano. We can only speculate about what happened. For all we know, the young boy could have been walking home from school as he usually would, only to run into a stranger who he had never seen before. Someone who may not have even been a part of the community. The idea that a stranger could have been making their way through the city and just so happened to come across a young boy and do the unspeakable before continuing their journey makes me feel extremely unsettled. It's the idea that sometimes bad things happen to people without any rhyme or reason, simply because the person was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What if Evandro had waited an extra 10 minutes before leaving school that day? Would his life have been spared, and could his family continue to their lives as usual? With cold cases such as these, the questions that follow are sometimes too difficult to ponder. I've had little luck finding the current status of Evandro's parents. I can only hope that they are okay wherever they are. but I'm sure the stain from 1992 remains. As far as Selena and her daughter Beatrice are concerned, both are relatively active on Instagram. It pains me to see the girls smiling happily, because I know behind those smiles are years of trials and tribulation. The Evandro case as a whole was one of Brazil's longest-lasting legal cases in history. It pains me because I think about how much life was wrongfully stolen from these women. The time spent in courtrooms, jail cells, and the public eye. But my hope is that they can finally rest now that the world knows the truth about the Guaratuba witches and Brazil's leaked torture tapes.